Hello, and welcome to what is probably one of the more interesting things to talk about, the Abdiel Class mine-laying cruisers. Now, I have to admit this will be going up late today because, well, I've been teaching more students than I expected I was going to be teaching on the 28th of December this year. So, life. But this will go up, and I hope you will enjoy it. As we wander into the world of how fast can I build a ship? The Abdiel class. I'm fairly certain if when the Royal Navy starts ordering these, they're thinking just in case we do decide we need to do an emergency supersized destroyer program. Let's take the idea for a tribal class destroyer and see how much bigger we can make it. Now, the Abdiel class are special. The concept comes from World War One, and you can see here is HMS Abdiel in World War One. She's a destroyer, and she basically would turn up and lay a lot of mines. Not unusual. There's a cruiser here which is also being used for the lovely joy of laying mines. And the point was, the Germans had the mine-laying submarines, and they are capable vessels. They really are. They also have surface raiders, or converted merchant ships, which lay mines and all these things. They can cause a tremendous amount of damage. The Royal Navy doesn't need those so much. You need submarines, but they can carry a limited amount of mines, and they're only really useful for the Royal Navy if you're planning on laying a lot of mines off the coast of anyone's, close off the coast of the Germans. And they do have a few of them, but they don't actually invest that much in them, really, because they own the surface of the ocean. There is no air threat. There is no question like in World War II there would be when there's a question of Royal Navy superiority, which is why you have the mine-laying cruisers, which we'll be talking about the Abdiel class, but also the mine-laying submarines, which I've mentioned in previous videos on the Royal Navy submarines. Because of the Royal Navy's worried about the Far East, because they're worried that they might not have necessarily superiority until they can get the ships out there. So any forces out there will be fighting from an inferior position, so therefore stealth, etc., will be more of a premium and more advantage than speed and economy. Now, one of the things I love about this design is it's still got some stealth and speed in its design, because you can see that if you look at it, you go, first glance, oh, that's a sand destroyer. You can see it's torpedoes. And then you go, hang on, those aren't torpedoes. That's artwork. And then you look at the big portrait picture rather than landscape, and you see what's hiding behind the artwork. Rows of mines. Oh, so many mines. And that's the other point when you're dealing with a surface ship versus a submarine, and the other reason for Royal Navy prefers the surface ships. They can carry a lot more. Plus they're pretty. But they can carry a lot more. And that causes upset for pretty much everyone. For the Royal Navy, it causes upset because when you start carrying this many mines, people like the Harwich Force start getting ideas about how close they can get, because instead of it being a multi-night visit or a long stay, it's a dash in, dash out. How close can we get? It becomes almost a constant refrain for the Royal Navy to be telling the Harwich force that was a bit too close to the enemy coastline. Harwich force turning around and going, "Us? We're angels." And Turret going, "You sure? Perhaps my navigation was off a bit. By what? 20 miles?" Not all of us are natural at mathematics. So the concept is you get in quickly, you lay as many mines as you can, and you get out. Preferably you get in and out before the enemy realize you're there. You certainly get out at such a speed that enemy air searches are unlikely to spot you. And this is, remember, pre-radar, when night flying is also still something which is not being actively considered, even in the beginning of the 1940s. The I cannot overstate how abnormal the Fleet Air Arm is in terms of its high concentration of night flying personnel. Even the Royal Air Force, which is really working on it, doesn't have the same level of concentration. And when you start to look at certain pilots and what things have to happen as the war goes on, you realize that some of the reasons we need to take it, that you have the time between certain operations you do, is because you need to train up personnel to operate at night. Basically, it's a legacy, as I've been over the British obsession with night fighting, of experiences in World War One, not Jutland necessarily, but it does have a legacy, and the Abdiel class are a legacy of that, because here is HMS Aurora. She's an Aerofuser class light cruiser. I like the Aerofuser class. In both wars, they're cute. Prominent participant in the Harwich Force. You can guess where this is going. Including acting as leader for the 10th Destroyer Flotilla. And guess what the cruiser here is with its own very large run of mine sitting on it is? Yes, that's HMS Aurora. You see, there was a worry that maybe the destroyers couldn't carry enough mines. And also, they might need fire support running in. So, some of the light cruisers also got the same modification. There's certain points at which various people started to worry about the command, control, and senior and general authorization of what the Harwich Force was getting up to. There's got to be a good book written about them soon. Sorry about that. So, these are the ships from which the Royal Navy draws when they start thinking about the Abdiel class. And, they're gorgeous looking ships. But if you're starting to think, hang on, they look like a free-stack enlarged destroyer, then you are not completely wrong. Because if the Tribal class destroyer is a destroyer in cruiser form, and if a Dido class cruiser is a cruiser in destroyer form, then I'm not quite sure how to describe this, but basically, destroyer hull lengthened and slightly enlarged. Lots of power. If I can put it conservatively, 72,000 shaft horsepower. Now, I have been through the Town Class, etc., various vessels before, but let's just remember the shaft horsepower of the Southamptons was 75,000. The Gloucester and Edinburgh's was 82,500 shaft horsepower. Those Town Class cruisers, they weigh in at roughly 11,000 to 12 or 13,000 tons fully loaded. So that's what you start thinking of. And then Abdiel Class. Fully loaded, well, 3,415 tons for the 1938 group, 3,475 tons for the War Emergency Program pair. So, roughly a quarter of the weight for pretty much the same shaft horsepower. Officially listed as top speeds being 39.75 knots and 38 knots. But I know of stories of destroyers going at what they thought was pushing 40 knots and them not only not being able to keep up with an Abdiel Class, but the Abdiel Class absolutely and completely, wholeheartedly whomping them. Okay? We're talking. What just went past us? There is a reason why 10th Flotilla in World War II goes from operating with one of these to operating with a Dido class. This kept overtaking them and trying to go off and fight the Germans on its own. They are an interesting vessel because, of course, they are technically listed cruisers, so you go, well, they come from the cruiser tonnage. But again, they are ordered in 1938. They are laid down in 1939. They are ordered and laid down by the point at which the Royal Navy has de facto decided that the treaty system isn't existing. Now, the Royal Navy is still limited by the politicians in some respects for the treaty system. But one thing they managed to get through the politicians, and this is, again, Admiral Henderson, the Abdiel Class. Hello. They had 4 Admiralty free drum water tube boilers, 2 Parsons geared steam turbines to drive 2 shafts, instead with a 72,000 shaft horsepower. So they're deploying 36,000 shaft horsepower per shaft versus the Town Class, which, well, they tend to operate with 4 shafts. So they're, let's go with the large ones. The 82,500 shaft horsepower, well, they're putting 21,125 shaft horsepower per shaft. And as this picture shows, they are gorgeous. But let's get back here. They're armed with 4-inch guns for AA defense, not really for anti-ship defense. They might scare off torpedo boats, but the whole point is this thing is supposed to be able to outrun pretty much everything, including some torpedoes. 4 quick-firing 2-pounders on quadruple mounts. They have Vickers machine guns and 156 mines. And it's much the same for the War Emergency Program. Other than they drop one of their pairs of quick-firing 4-inch guns for more 40mm Bowmafors. It makes sense. These ships are high speed, low drag. They are designed to turn up, disperse 156 mines, and one of the minefields which have been laid in World War I was only 240 mines by the Harwich force. So, being able to turn up with roughly 60% of that in one go, that's good. Two of these turn up. That's quite a decent minefield. And remember, the Royal Navy orders 4 and then orders immediately 2 more immediately war begins. There is a problem though. These ships, rather like the Tribal class, suffer from the fact they are useful. So they keep wanting to use them. Because if you're fast and you're sexy and large, as these ones are, you can be used for other things like high-speed transport of important goods and reconnaissance and commando operations and basically they become someone's idea of where's the Abdiel class. It's not where's the aircraft carrier, it's where's the Abdiel class. And that's the other thing about these designs. I'm always fairly certain that the Royal Navy has in mind that if they ended up fighting a Pacific War where they found out they needed to rapidly produce an anti-aircraft cruiser which could keep up with the fleet and its fast maneuverings, this was a basis of that design. The Didos, I know, were lovely, and they got the 5.25-inch gun, etc. And you wouldn't want to get rid of it, but this is churning it out with the 4-inch guns. This is your C-class aren't holding up. We can quite rapidly replace them with this, and it's only going to displace 3,500 tons in full. Well, 3,475, but let's be honest, if you're adding in a bit more of an AA mix, you might bump its weaponry up a bit. But still. And that will be perfectly fine for air defense. Now, I should point out that at 38 knots, they have a range of 1,000 nautical miles. But at 38 knots, they drink fuel like I drink iron brew. Constantly and in large gulps. It disappears. HMS Abdiel didn't have the longest career of World War II, although she did manage to pick up Biscay 1941, Crete 1941, Libya 1941, and Sicily 1943 before she got sunk. Even before she was accepted into service, she was ordered to lay mines with the objective of preventing Scharnhorst and Gneisenau breaking out from Brest, and this is in March 1941. In Operation GV, GX, and GY, Abdiel are escorted by Intrepid, Impulsive, and Icarus, plus Kipling, Kelly, and Jackal, laid mines in the vicinity of Little Seoul Bank, and somewhere not far from Brest. Now, Intrepid, Impulsive, and Icarus were also mine-laying destroyers. So that's quite a hefty minefield, and if you're do 3 operations, that's a lot of mines. Abdiel attempted in April 1941 for a second time to complete her trials program, but it was again abandoned when she was ordered to join Dido and the destroyers Kelly, Kipling, Kelvin, Jackal, and Jersey that moved from Plymouth to Gibraltar, loaded with supplies destined for Malta. They then sort of gave up trying to perform her trials, decided she was in service, and she joined the Mediterranean fleet. At which point Cunningham went, I have a cunning plan. She took part in Operation Dunlop. This time, she was given an escort which included Nubian. Trouble destroyer, class destroyer, turning up to make sure she gets through. In May 1941, Abdiel laid a field of roughly 150 mines, possibly the full 156, maybe just 150. off Accra Ducton or Cape Ducato. That's not far from the left island in the Ionian Sea. That field, pretty much the day it was laid, the Italian destroyer, the Carlo Mirabella, was sunk. The gunboat Pellegrini Matacucci, and the German transport Kivas and Marburg, which were all transporting contingents of the 2nd Panzer Division from Patras in Greece across the Adriatic Sea to the port of Taranto in Italy. She took part in the landing of 800 commandos at Suda Bay and took part in the moving of 4,000 troops from Crete. It's just, she has a massively long career doing all sorts of naughty things, and she claims quite a few enemy vessels sunk in her minefields. Abdiel herself, conversely, was sunk by mines in Taranto harbour in 1943 during Operation Slapstick. The mines had been laid just a few hours earlier by 2 German torpedo boats as they'd left the harbour. Abdiel, carrying in troops of the British 1st Airborne Division, the Royal Welsh, and the Oban anti-tank battery of the Royal Artillery, took the berth which had been declined earlier by the captain of the USS cruiser USS Boise. Shortly after midnight, 2 mines detonated beneath Abdiel, and the mine layer sank in 3 minutes. Unfortunately, great loss of life of both sailors and soldiers. Latona. She was commissioned on May 1941 and would be sunk on the 25th of October 1941. So, not exactly a long career. However, she packs quite a lot into it. She never seems to have served in her primary role as a mine layer, instead being used to deliver stores and supplies to the armies and garrisons at Tobruk and Cyprus. She commissioned Latona sailed the Scapa Flow, embarked stores, an extra 20mm cannon for defense against air attacks. Once loading was completed, she sailed for the Mediterranean the 16th of May, went via the Cape of Good Hope and the Red Sea, so went a long way round. Arrived in Alexandria on the 21st of June, joined her sister Abdiel there. The following day, they sailed to support military operations in eastern Mediterranean. Latona's first assignment was to carry RAF personnel to Cyprus to reinforce the garrison there. She returned to Alexandria in July. She sailed again in August in company with Abdiel, and this time with the Australian cruiser Hobart and Australian destroyers Napier and Nizam to support the garrison at Tobruk. They carried some 6,300 troops to Tobruk and evacuated another 6,100. On 25th of October, the ships supporting Tobruk came under air attack north of Bardia. Latona, carrying 1,000 Polish troops at the time, was hit in the engine room by a bomb from a Ju-87, they reckon, but it could have been an Italian Ju-87, but they reckon it was a German one. They always presume they're German ones, but there are lots of Italian Ju-87s which get involved in World War II at various points. It's an interesting discussion point, let's say. I think probably it's a German one, but I'm going to raise up the fact that there is some positioning it might have been an Italian one or Italian flown. This started a fire which soon raged out of control, and Hero and Encounter came to destroyers came alongside and evacuated most of the troops and crew. She managed to remain afloat for a little bit longer after the magazine exploded. Differently to Abdiel, only 4 officers, 16 crew members, and 7 soldiers were killed, mostly because it took so long for her to go down, which is, again, an interesting point on this design. This is a design built for speed, and yet she survives quite heavy damage and keeps going for quite a while. Manxman. I love the lines of these ships. I really do. Manxman is one of the ones which, well, how do you know it, survives World War II. She has a post-war service, but her wartime service, well, she delivered mines to Murmansk. She then transferred to Mediterranean, where she took part in relief runs to Malta. Took part in Operation Mincemeat. Where she laid mines in the Gulf of Genoa whilst disguised as the French destroyer Leopard. October 1941 to February 1942, Manxman was returned to the home fleet and took part in a number of operations in the North Sea and English Channel. In March of 42, she joined the Eastern Fleet at Killiney in the Indian Ocean, and carrying out mainly escort and patrol duties. In October, she participated in the assault and capture the island of Nosy on the northwest coast of Madagascar, which was occupied by Vichy French forces. She then transferred to Mediterranean again. She was sent with supplies to Malta, did some mine laying in the Sicilian Channel, and whilst in transit from Algiers to Gibraltar was torpedoed by U-375 and severely damaged. Following emergency repairs, though, which took place at both Oran and Gibraltar, she returned to Newcastle upon Tyne, where she was given extensive repair work. She's commissioned again in April 1945, so think about it, she's been out of the war for quite a while, being repaired. She goes off to join the British Pacific Fleet. She arrives at Geelong shortly after VJ Day and then was used for support, reparation and supply operations. She's a lovely-looking ship and a very capable one. And the fact it took so long to repair her is kind of an interesting one to me. I think it reflects the reality of the circumstance. Mine-laying cruisers are very, very useful. And high-speed vessels like this are very, very useful. But they're mainly useful when you're on the defensive. Once you're on the offensive, you can use them for things, but they're not so useful. And I think it's interesting because she gets damaged in December 1942. And I would argue that they could have probably tried Russia, but it takes a while to get her home. So she gets home in 1943 after 2 stops on the way. Then it's 1944, which is all preparing for the D-Day invasion. Do you need this for the D-Day invasion? Well, we've already got a couple in service, so we don't need this one. No. And then it's looking to the war in the Far East. And again, by the time 1945 rolls around, there aren't really a lot of Japanese surface ships coming out and attacking things. They come, but not that regularly. So Rapid Mine Layer is only going to put mines in your way. Welshman. Welshman. She is sunk February 1943. And she serves again with the Home Fleet before being assigned to various mine-laying duties off western Scotland, and then being attached to the Bay of Biscay, and as you guessed it, ends up transporting stores and personnel to Gibraltar, Freetown, Takoradi. That's basically the coast of Africa. before deploying the Straits of Dover in early February 1942 to lay mines across the routes likely to be used in the event of a breakout by the Schneisenhau and Scharnhorst, and then resumes various mine laying operations in the Bay of Biscay. In 1942 May, she goes to join the Mediterranean to join Force H in the Malta convoys. She sailed from Gibraltar disguised as a French destroyer with 240 tons of stores and RAF personnel on board during Operation Bowie. She's sighted by enemy aircraft, but the deception to an extent seems to succeed, and she enters Grand Harbour at Malta on 10th May, detonating 2 mines with her paravines and sustaining some damage. Now, the paravines are a sort of towed underwater glider, and she has them, when they're working, they have them spun off the sides as well, so they have to try and detonate mines as far away from the hull as possible. And she keeps doing, then works to Gibraltar. She returns to Gibraltar on 12th of May. She returns to the UK, Yarrows at Scotsman, good yard, and they managed to fix her and get her back to Gibraltar by the end of May. So, not much damage sustained. And again, this is one of the points about the earlier about Manxman. You've got these ship vessels in service, you've got new ones coming into service. Yes, you like to have more, but there's only so much effort and energy you have to go around. Then takes part in Operation Harpoon. Always fun to take part in. Takes part in Operation Pedestal. And in January 1943, Welshman was transporting stores including 150 tons of seed potatoes to Malta for carrying out mine-laying operations in the Saki Channel, across the Axis evacuation route from Tunisia. She also transferred troops from Beirut to Famagusta in Cyprus. And finally, on the 1st of February 1943, she was transporting stores and personnel to Tobruk. She's hit by a torpedo fired by U-617, commanded by Abdiel Brandy. 2 hours later, she sinks east of Tobruk, with the loss of 155 lives. The survivors are rescued by the destroyers Tescott and Belvoir and taken to Alexandria. Notice a pattern here. One of the things you do notice with these ships, and I do critique it sometimes, is that because they can go very fast, sometimes the zigzagging doesn't happen as much as you might think it do, because they're going quite so fast. And they do keep up zigzagging. I'm not saying they get overconfident, but I'm not sure they quite zigzag as much as they possibly should have done. And this is not based on any officer being bad, but I'm looking at the entire sort of working assumptions. And you've got to consider some of the working assumptions of anti-submarine warfare, as we've discussed in our videos, are quite interesting, including the one, of course, that the submarines wouldn't pop up in the middle of convoys, because when you're doing convoy practice, use fleet auxiliary ships, which are merchant ships, so, it's merchant ships. But there's a difference between a fleet auxiliary and a merchant ship. It has guns! No submarine is going to be stupid enough to pop up next to a ship which actually has a gun and crew who can use it. So, it doesn't happen in exercise. You then go into the real war scenario, and these merchant ships don't have guns. Pop up. Hello! Oh, sugar. Same with the 40 knot speed Ariadne. Now, Ariadne survives World War II. Her first duties were to lay mines off the coast of Norway. In fact, she spends quite a lot of time doing mine operations. She also takes part in Operation Stonewall. That was intercepting blockade runners off the west coast of German-occupied France. there weren't, believe it or not, many blockade runners which could run away from this thing once it got on the scent. The guys are going, "Hello, how fast can you go? You can do 30 knots? Cute. Shall I do rings around you as you go?" She leaves home orders in January 1944 to join the US 7th Fleet in the Pacific Ocean Theater. And in June 1944, she lays 146 miles onto the northern coast of New Guinea. And that's when landings are made in the Mapia Group Islands. In November 1944, Arena was used to carry US Army soldiers. And during her period of active service, she's estimated to have laid at least 1,352 mines. So pretty much 8 full loads. After the war, she repatriated British prisoners of war from Japan and was used as a mail ship due to her speed. She paid off into reserves fleet at Sheerness and did not see service again, apart from a short trial after refit in the 1950s. This trial involved the replacement of her light anti-aircraft guns with more modern weapons. She's finally sold for scrapping in 1965. Which I think is rather sad, but it's interesting to note that the mine layers from World War II, these ones do survive quite well in peacetime. They are kept around because they are. A fast ship which can do mine laying is a pretty useful asset, especially if you're looking in a Cold War scenario. Fine, we have Apollo. I like Apollo. She is commissioned 1944, decommissioned 1946, recommissioned 1951, decommissioned 1961. She serves as part of the force in the Korean War, making high-speed relief supplies to various islands. She served as the flagship of the Commander-in-Chief Home Fleet at one point in her career, in which I think she was absolutely brilliant. And if it hadn't been because of an accident with a very beautiful weapon class destroyer called HMS Battle Axe, which was carrying steam trials whilst moored alongside Apollo at Portsmouth, then she might not have been sold off when she was, because this in August 1960. Basically, Battle Axe steam was accidentally let into the Battle Axe's turbines, which drove the ship forward and broke Apollo's mooring lines. Apollo then collides with the frigate Wakeful, which also breaks free from moorings and strikes a Cassian at the entrance to the dock. And Apollo's stern is damaged as well, while Wakeful suffered buckled plates from the impact by Apollo and a badly damaged bow from the collision with the Cassian. So, she's all sorts of damaged, when actually she was really freaking useful and they didn't want to get rid of her. But damaged, then we can either repair her or we can keep a town class cruiser or something else going. So you limit because the government's not going to give you any more money. Not because the government doesn't have more money. We've been out of this before. The government makes the decision, and government it's in terms of priorities. Yes, governments do have to pay back debt. So I don't want you to start thinking I'm saying governments have to pay back that. They do have to pay back debt, but to an extent, they choose how quickly they pay it down. They have to service the interest. But they can set, basically themselves, the pace at which they pay back that debt in terms of the amount of it. And you can go, well, it's best to pay it back quickly because that means you pay less overall. And you're quite correct. Apart from when you're talking over the government pay scales of inflation starts to be a factor, and they get away with some of these things far more than you do. But that means the government's not going to make a choice of, the option isn't necessarily raise taxes, pay more for defense. It could be pay back the debt slightly slower and pay a little bit more for defense. They don't want to do that. So budgets are tight. She herself, though, had a pretty interesting career. In fact, during 7th of June, she embarked Allied Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Naval Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Bertram Ramsay, and Montgomery, and the staff officer from shape to visit the assault areas on D-Day +1. Unfortunately, she grounded while on the way, so her passengers had to be transferred to the destroyer Undaunted. I think it's just because she got fed up with the egos being on board, right? Myself. And she was going, who can I pass this lot off to? There's a destroyer over there. Yep, you got him. She was used to lay deep trap minefields as countermeasures to U-boat activities in inshore waters. And those were something which the U-boats really, really didn't like. Which to this day we also really don't like, because guess what? A good number of mines, which you still sometimes see popping up in the waters around the North Sea, come from the deep trap minefields. Overall, there is an excellent book on this class, and it's worthwhile going and reading. They are really, really cool ships. There is an excellent model you can make. You are not going to see my model because I do not like the camouflage I have currently, so you ain't seeing that. That is a book I own and am very, very happy with. I'm not reading from it because I want you to go and get it if you want to, and there will be a link down below. The point about these ships is this. If you think of the Abdiel class, think of speed, because that's what they're designed around. Speed is their armor. Speed is their protection. Their chance of surviving, if they're supposed to be off on their independent mine-laying operations far away from the support of the main fleet, is that by the time you realize where they've been, they will not be anywhere near there. And by the time you know where they are, they're nowhere near you. They're lovely ships. Right, what have we got to come out? We have the Morocco crisis on Thursday. Fun times. And we currently have, working away, the votes for the future January lives. And Kent class. And there's a few more than that being announced at certain points, but I don't think they've made it into this version of the slide. Ah, well, I'll track them down. Anyway. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy tomorrow's video, which is going to be, well, there's going to be a second take of it done, because the take I did before this has terrible sound. But we'll see what we can do. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Hope you're having a nice Christmas, and you're looking forward to a lovely new year. And we're in the in-between period, so happy in-between. Take care.